Hello, welcome to another episode of Justice Now. I'm your host, Joe Lewis. I'm bringing to you today a very disturbing story involving a woman and her experience with the Child Protective Service system. This woman's name is Tracy Kettles, and I want you as the audience to listen very closely to her story and pay very close attention to the issues involved with her story. I'd like to welcome you to our show, Tracy.
Thank you, Joe. I'm pleased to be here, and I waited diligently to come and...
Yeah, we've been trying to get your show on for quite some time.
Yes, it was worth the wait, and because the hope is not gone.
Right.
There will always be hope, and there's something yet to come.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, let's start off. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself? I mean, how long have you lived in Rochester, Tracy?
Well, my oldest son and I relocated here 19 years ago from New York City. Originally, I come from Puerto Rico.
Okay.
And we resided in New York City until he was a year old.
Okay.
And we came up here in 1989. I came to go to college. I had better opportunities here than there at that time.
Okay.
And that was my main reason for coming.
Okay.
So we came to reestablish and relocate, which we did do. And that started our first year here with me attending college, Monroe Community College.
What'd you take up?
I took up human services there and graduated there. And so we were just making a new life, trying to make better plans to have some stable living for us and future plans for my son and I.
How did your involvement with Child Protective Services begin? How did that all come about?
Well, when it started, it was a shock because I had never had any contact with them prior to 2001.
Right.
I had lived in Puerto Rico, Florida, and New York City, and Rochester, and it was right here in Rochester that it started. In 2001, I remember the first contact I ever had with them. I owned a house in the community, and one day there was a card left on my door. So I responded, and it was a woman, a caseworker, and she wanted me to call her, and I did. She wanted to come to my house. I didn't know why. She one day popped up unexpectedly, and because I recognized that she had a New York State title, I allowed her willingly to come in to my house, which she didn't make any comment about. And I thought that that was basically the end of my involvement. I then got a letter in the mail from Albany saying that somebody had called in a report and that eventually it was determined to be unfounded. So I figured that was just a brief contact that had come and gone.
Right.
I started to hear about many other people in the community who had had reports like this called on them. And little by little, I started meeting more individuals who had been subject of reports called out of spite, and neighbors seeking revenge, ex-boyfriends.
So you think it was out of spite that you were called?
Probably. When I looked at the nature of the report.
What was the nature? What were the allegations made?
The first one stated I was homeless, and at the time I was a homeowner. I was the sole owner of my house.
Wait a minute. The report said that you were homeless.
Yes.
And you owned your own home.
Yes.
And the caseworker didn't have enough sense to notice this due to the fact that she did leave her calling card at your house.
She didn't. I even tried to show her my documents, my tax bills and record, and she had no interest in it and said, well, I might be hearing from her again or I might not. So everything I tried to show her, at that time, it was Ms. Clark who came, and I didn't even have a chance. Once I started trying to show her things that I thought would help her to see this, she didn't have any interest in it, and I couldn't understand why.
Now, this Ms. Clark woman, did she ask you any other questions, like do you have family residing in
Yes, she did.
So she inquired to see who you had as far as support?
She did ask that.
Okay, and did you have anyone?
At that time, no. Our family, our biological family was not in Rochester.
Okay.
So I was explaining that we had longtime friends here, and
Right.
I was a member of a church at that time.
Right.
And so she did ask that one question.
Okay. I asked that for a reason. But now, where did she go from there? Was there any more contact with this woman?
No,
So
no,
there was no more contact with her?
not with her. No.
Okay, but there was contact with Child Protective
Yes.
Services?
So then,
Was it in regards to the same allegations made prior? Okay,
no.
you go ahead and
Then
explain what was going on.
subsequently after that first contact, my oldest son and I
Right.
had moved to Florida for a year and a half. And at the time, it was him and an ex-husband who was a husband at that time. And there was no contacts at all there or from Rochester. And we lived there for a year and a half. And I established some business endeavors down there in Florida for a year and a half. And at that point, we decided to return to Rochester. I decided to go back for further education. My son had some friends here who he wanted to continue to have his ties with. We came back in 2001. I was expecting my second son, Kevin, in 2001.
Okay.
The end of 2001. And there was no other contact at that time when I was pregnant with my second son. Nobody called or sent letters.
Right.
So I figured that it was just, that was the past.
Okay.
So upon going to the hospital, October 21st, 2001, which was in Middletown, New York, outside of New York City, the day of our discharge, all was well. The birth of my son was safe and he was healthy and successful. We were successful in that. The day we were to leave, I got a call and someone said, "Oh, we heard that you had your baby," and hung up on me in the hospital, and I didn't know who it was, didn't recognize the voice, but it kind of scared me.
Right.
Because I didn't know who was calling.
Right.
But I didn't think much of it. So we got ready to leave the hospital, and a woman came to my room and said, "Well, I'm here to take your baby." And I said, "What?" And I almost fainted. And I asked for a nurse to come in, and she says, "Well, I'm a social worker, and I have gotten a call to take your child. You will not be leaving the hospital with him." And I said, "You have no reason to take him. That's abduction." And
So Child Protective Services showed up at the hospital
Yes.
without any allegations made against you in retrospect to maltreatment
None.
or abuse,
No.
and took the child.
Yes, she came and she said she'll be back, that we shouldn't leave until she comes back. And I says, "I'm getting ready to go home with my baby. I want to take my baby home and I'm getting ready to leave." So she returned, and she had 3 security guards, and I think there was 1 uniformed police officer from what I remember. And my son was in the nursery, and so she abducted him from the nursery, and then my room was blocked off by those individuals. They would not allow me to leave to try to get to the nursery, so I was literally forcibly blocked off from my access to my child.
What was the name of the worker that showed up?
Her name was Mrs. Draper, Graper, and I never saw her again. Never.
Wow. So they showed up. That doesn't make any sense when the New York State Procedural Manual for Child Protective Services is online.
Right.
And it clearly says that there has to be an adequate investigation.
And there was
and there has to be indisputable evidence in that investigation to support the allegations made against you before they could even proceed to take a child.
And there was never anybody calling or bringing me papers to say, "These are our concerns, these are our allegations," or any charge of any maltreatment, child endangerment, child abuse, none of it. There was nothing on paper. Nobody told me why he was being taken. So he was kidnapped from Horton Medical Center on October 24th of 01.
That had to be traumatic for you.
It was. It was like I flashed back to it because it was almost like a movie. And many people have told me that it reminds them of the Angelina Jolie movie that came out this past year, where the person is falsely accused and the child gets kidnapped. And I was in shock.
So what were your steps after that? What took place?
I called the police department, and that was down there, and they were trying to find out more. Then I called a lawyer, and he did some kind of checking of something, and he said, well, I think they're going to I called a lawyer in Middletown, and he said, I think probably if you were still living in Monroe County, the child is going back, your baby's going back to Monroe County, because I still had a house here.
Right.
And so, because I didn't know where to go. Where do I go to get my baby? Do I go to the courts in Middletown? Do I go to Monroe County? Where do I go? And nobody seemed to have any answers. And all the hospital staff that I talked to in the hospital had no answers for me. Nobody told me, well, this is what we were told. You know, we had to call. The call, I don't believe the call came from anyone in the hospital.
Right.
Somebody who knew I was pregnant had to have placed the call.
Right.
Because it wasn't the staff. Because there was never any documentation that I got from the hospital or his records that showed that there was an issue in the hospital. He was taken at 3 days old. I had prenatal care my whole pregnancy. I was not on drugs or alcohol. I had a home.
Okay.
I was happy.
Right.
I wasn't depressed. I was ready to take my baby home and nurture my baby like a mother would do.
Right, right. How did you eventually find out where to go to find out where your son was?
Well, because I couldn't get any real information, that lawyer in Middletown suggested I go back to Rochester, and that I go back because that's where we were living, my oldest son and I. So I made the trip back, and it was just I was so distraught. I could barely drive. I had to drive back without my baby, not knowing really where he was and was he okay, you know, and it was a panic that I couldn't even explain in words. I felt like I couldn't even breathe.
Right.
And we came back, and then, ironically, 4 days later, from that date, there was a letter sent to come to family court in Monroe County.
Okay.
And so then I knew at that point it was Child Protective Service in Rochester that had initiated that action, but had not told me in any warning someone was going to do that.
Right.
And I knew then that it was an illegal removal of my child.
Now, when you showed up to court, eventually, what were the allegations of the reason of why they took that child out of the hospital at 3 days old?
What was said was not facts. It was untruths. It was said that somebody called in and said that they thought I had a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. And I didn't have that diagnosis, and I didn't have any kind of record of mental illness documented or thereby which. And so I was really even more shocked, because I knew even at that time that even had I had that condition, that I knew many people who had the same diagnosis, who had their children were living with them. And I had never been hospitalized for mental hygiene problems, and I had never attempted suicide. I had never, had any acts of those natures. So I knew that this was either totally a mistake or totally a lie.
Okay, now, and once they made these allegations against you, was there any request for any type of mental evaluations?
Well, initially, no. I was not told what I needed to do to get my baby back immediately, and I was willing to do what was asked of me to do.
Did they put any programs into place to better help unite you and the child back together?
No.
Because these are things that are in the Child Protective Service procedural manual.
In 8 years' time of intervention without my consent from Child Protective Services, I've never gotten a referral to one single program or service. The same workers who said they would work with me never never referred me to anything. They never provided any kind of services or referrals for me. And I had tried to explain that most of my family speaks Spanish,
right,
and that I at least should have somebody who speaks Spanish as a caseworker so they could talk to me and my family.
okay,
And that didn't happen either. So I was sitting in court with legal words that I didn't understand in English
right,
from the very beginning of this.
right,
And I couldn't even express, what I was trying to express most of the time at that time.
okay.
And then I wound up going to college to take more English classes so that I could understand some of what they were talking about. I went to
How
RIT.
long were you in the system with that child, trying to get her back? How long
Well,
did the court
with
proceedings-
him,
and how did it end up?
Well, it was devastating because he was immediately abducted and put into a unknown foster home, as it's called, and I did not know the people. They never really tried to know me. They were introduced to me after about 6 months, but I never knew where they lived, and I had no connection with them. They allowed me no access to my baby. I wanted to breastfeed him. That was interfered upon. I was put under supervised visitations and never even knew why. I didn't have an investigation pending his removal.
Right.
The removal happened and it did not pend into an investigation. It was just a flat-out removal. At the time this happened, my oldest son was 13, and he had never been injured with me in my care and custody. He'd never been left alone as a child. He'd never been malnourished or without medical care. And I raised him as a single parent and always loved him and always will. So I couldn't understand how could it be that my son at 13, who was always with me, couldn't see his brother because of a call of this nature.
Wow. So now that's happened to you. How did you handle that?
Well,
What was your state?
Well, my state was that I was determined to get my second son back home.
Right.
I wanted my two sons to grow up together, and I did have family support. However, they were not living in Rochester at the time, but they were not in support of the removal of my son at all. And I spent many nights just asking why me. At that time, I didn't know there was thousands of other people this has happened to. So I went to court and I adamantly asked the caseworker who initially on that case was Ms. Maureen Spencer, and then it was transferred to Judy Bentley. I asked it for Kevin to be placed with a biological family member on his father's side because they were all living in Rochester.
Right, right.
There was never any real diligent follow-up to that. There was never any real effort to place him with his grandmother or grandfather, which was my wish.
So they didn't try to find any of these people at all?
No.
No effort whatsoever?
At that time, no, and that was in 2001 to 2003.
Right.
So it was me going to court by myself. His father had relocated to Georgia, and they just all felt that I would get him back because I was doing what I needed to do.
Right.
Going to court every single month. Starting in 2001, I was in court every month, and I was going to supervised visitations, which every time I went, I had to just be with my baby. And
how much time did they give you with the child?
I had 1 hour. The
You
visits.
are kidding me.
No, I am not, Joe. The visits were 1 hour increments, and they were held at an agency in Rochester on Fitzhugh Street, and they never progressed to anything more than 1 hour a week, and they were for 2 times a week. That was the maximum that ever happened, and they never gradually progressed to my home for home visits. They never were moved anywhere else except, I think, from what I recall, there was 2 visits at 111 Westfall Road, which was under supervision, and even that was very, very, very unpleasant because the foster mother was trying to lure my son to give her undivided attention instead of just naturally being able to play with me.
Right.
And I could see then, at even a year old, my son was not feeling content with these people he was placed with. At 1 year old, he was throwing things at the foster parents. I witnessed him throwing cars, toys. When it was time for our visit to be over, the natural nurturing he was feeling from me was gone. Right, was about to be gone.
Right.
And he would act it out, and it was being acted out with these aggressive things because he couldn't say what he was feeling. The foster parents made it very, very, very unpleasant because they never really sat down to talk to me and tell me what their intention was.
Right.
I was never invited to their house. They never wanted to come to mine. There was times that actually they took Kevin out of state without my permission. It was never agreed upon that they could take him to these states in the South, and I found out after the fact they had already went away. Visits were canceled on me at least 10 times between 2002 and 2003.
The 1 hour visit that
yes,
you was getting
yes,
once a week was being canceled.
Yes, by the foster parents, and the caseworker at the time was this Ms. Bentley, and she, 90% of the time I was never informed that they were already gone from the area. They had already left Monroe County, and I didn't say that it was okay.
So they allowed this woman, or these individuals, to adopt?
Well, after 2 years of me trying to get him back, and by then I felt that my life was so squeaky clean, although not perfection, but I didn't have anybody around me who was a danger to my children. I still had my own residence and income to take care of them, and went through all these things. I went through mental health evaluations from 2002 to 2003. One time, one was set up by a caseworker, which I knew was basically biased,
right,
because the caseworker was able to call before I even got to the evaluation and interject her opinion about me.
Right, right.
Then once again, I asked for a Spanish-speaking worker. That was never, ever happened. So I knew that there was some difference in understanding cultural things that were of my culture, and they weren't understood. And I tried to express that, and it never was heard upon deaf ears. So at the point of 18 months of him being in foster care, they started petitions to terminate my rights. And then there was allegation of neglect, which I could never understand. How was it that I was supposed to have neglected him when we never left the hospital?
He was 3 days old.
Right, we never left the hospital, and I was not on drugs or alcohol, and he was healthy, and I was healthy in my pregnancy, and I was just dumbfounded.
And let me make this clear. They came up with the allegation of neglect when they tried to terminate your rights.
Yes.
All of a sudden they want to terminate your rights now. All of a sudden now the allegations are neglect of a child that they took that was 3 days old when they took the child from you.
Right. That's what happened. That's what happened. So I was trying to still get him back, and I realized that there were two major lies that were the foundation of their case, which was one, the alleged bipolar, and then the second one was that somebody had said they thought that I put him on his stomach when he was sleeping at that hospital, and that I do not recall that happening. And then some people do put their kids on their stomach instead of their back, but I don't.
Right.
So that was the mental health allegation was the first piece, and then the second piece was what they would call a safety issue.
Right.
But I once again was dumbfounded because by then my oldest son was 15, and I had gone through parenting classes and had family help me when he was first born, but I had raised him with just very, very little family support because they didn't feel I needed to be watched all the time.
Right.
So they started the process to terminate my rights. I really didn't think it would happen because I had met so many people by then who had successfully gotten their children back or didn't, but it was something very, very serious. That couldn't be overcome. in any
Right.
way.
But what was the end result? Did they terminate your...
In the end, it was a local judge, and he decided to terminate rights.
Who was the judge?
It was Judge Rivoli.
Judge Rivoli?
And I brought the papers from the decision he made, but prior to that happening, I went through a trial. That's how it happened, the termination. I saw Dr. Kanapari, who's a very well-respected psychiatrist, and his report was clear that I didn't have psychiatric disturbance, and he testified. So even after...
And that's this form that you have
Yes.
right here.
Yes.
That's this form.
Right, that's
okay,
Dr.
now I've read this one, and I also read the court papers, and this is the decision.
Right.
Correct?
Yes.
Now I read this as well, and this doctor came to court and testified
Yes.
in your behalf.
He did. And Judge Rivoli was there, and that was at the level of the trial.
Right, and they said that they found no mental illness
That's right. And
issues with you.
Yes, and
Period.
he even stated he felt that it was in the best interest of my sons to be with the mother, me. He said that under his oath, swearing to it.
And the strangest thing was reading the decision. They said that in the decision that you were asked to get a mental evaluation.
Uh-huh.
And based on their decision, they said you failed to do that when the very doctor who gave you the mental evaluation showed up in court. That was in the this is in the part of their finding of facts.
Uh-huh. It's a shock. I mean, I read it and I thought, could he have forgotten which case this was? Because it was so blatantly far from what happened. It was just as though I said that we weren't here on this day doing the show when we were.
Right, right.
And other people will see that we were. It was like out of touch with reality. Those papers were out of touch with reality.
I know when I read it, I was like, I mean, come on, you're...
I'd never personally encountered somebody of authority who, or a situation where someone had oversighted or through dishonesty chose
extreme connivery.
Right, chose to ignore facts
Right.
of a situation, which at that point I felt like someone who had been convicted, you know, of a crime almost,
Right.
and had then would have to wait years to be adjudicated, you know, maybe through something, DNA or something overturning something.
Now, did you appeal this decision?
I did.
And
I
what
appealed
happened with your
it.
appeal?
I went to the appellate division, and the
And did you do this on your own, or did you have the
yeah, I
help of an
filed the
attorney?
appeal, but then the public defender in Monroe County stepped in as the attorney.
So you filed by yourself?
Yes, I
Wow,
did all
good,
that.
Good for you.
And we went to the appellate division, and the case that was being thrown up on that day was that the claim was that my son Kevin, who I lost my rights to on paper, was bonded with the foster parents, and I knew that he wasn't even that. And prior to that happening, my last supervised visits with him, I noticed that he had bruises all up and down his arm, and I did verbally, face-to-face tell this last caseworker, Ms. Bentley, and she told me that she couldn't find anything on that.
Right.
And then I didn't know who to turn to, police, this, that, law enforcement, and then she said that she thought it was made up information.
How old was your son at the time you saw
At the
this movie?
time, he was almost 4.
Wow.
And that was the last visits I had with him. And then when I asked the foster mother, she said he fell out of a bed, and I just knew that couldn't have been so, because he had a small junior bed of a 4-year-old, and it wasn't that high up.
Right.
And the bruises came all the way up his arm, so it was
Right.
from some kind of force or
It looked
trauma.
like somebody was grabbing him.
Right, I knew that. I had
Based
taken...
off the way it looked to you. you would
Sure,
say.
because I had at that point went back to school again and was taking nurses' aid programs and training, and I knew it was some kind of a trauma.
Right.
And at that same time, I discovered that my son Kevin had also been taken to the Gallisano Children's Clinic, and the foster parents were placing him on medication for an adult with bipolar disorder.
They were giving
They were drugging him.
a 4-year-old child.
Yes, at the time, when I was losing my rights, nobody consented with me, and nobody said, you know, what do you think about this? What's your input? And they took him, and my rights was being taken, so I couldn't really have much voice. And then I got the reports that showed that he was on Depakote and other mood stabilizers, which are for adults, which is maltreatment of a child for sure in his development. And so those were some of the last times that I saw him.
Now you have other children too.
Yes. So after 2004, I had Emmanuel in the end of 2003, and he was kidnapped from Highland Hospital the day we were leaving. So
they did the same thing with Emmanuel. They showed up at the hospital.
Yes.
Took Emmanuel.
Yes.
No report, CPS report,
no.
allegations, nothing.
No.
Just took him.
It was the worker who had been assigned to Kevin, that Mrs. Bentley.
Mrs. Bentley.
Yeah, Judith Bentley came to the hospital the day we were leaving. I was prepared to take Emmanuel home and very happy once again to have another child. And she actually called guards, and whatever she told them, they blocked my room. First, she came in my room forcibly. I didn't invite her in my hospital room, and she pushed the door in, which was against my wishes.
Right.
And she came in by force into my room and said, "Oh, you know, I'm taking your son." And I said, "You can't do that. You don't have a reason. I'm not giving him up for adoption."
Right.
And she didn't listen to anything I said. And I said, "What is your allegation?" Which she never told me. She never gave me papers initially. She asked me, would I sign a consent to remove him order? I said, no way, no.
Right.
And I said, I think I need the police or somebody.
Right.
And so she took him, and I asked her, where was he going? She said, well, I'm not going to tell you that right now. I said, well, you're abducting my child. So she had, in the name of her title, New York State title, which once again, there was no investigation right before this happened. So at that point, I really felt victimized, you know, in this city. And I tried over and over to figure out who could have been calling, or, you know, how was I becoming this target? And everything that I came up with didn't match of a reason. It was not a clear reason. And so I was devastated once again and went back to court for Emmanuel, and no real effort was made to place him with a biological family either, not his father or his father's family. Then we both went to court for Emmanuel. We found out eventually that he was placed with Kevin in that same foster home with the people who put Kevin on the drugs. And I said, please, you know, not with them, you know, somebody else. And he was never moved from there. And as last I know, as of last month, they were both still in that same foster home.
Now, every child that you have had since then, they have shown up at the hospital and taken the child.
Not everyone. They showed up for Emmanuel in Monroe County. Emmanuel, Misha, who was born in 2005, Tasha, and Sophia. So that's 4 of 7 children at 3 days old. Now, Sasha was born after Emmanuel, and that was in 2004. Nobody came to the hospital to abduct her. We left Park Ridge Hospital, pardon me, and what I did find out was that there was a call made the day after, I believe it was the day after, to the social work department. And the caseworker, who was the same woman, Ms. Bentley, asked them, could they make a referral against me?
Right.
And they would not allow it.
Right.
They would not allow it.
Okay.
And they said there is no grounds at Park Ridge. They said we have no medical issues of concern with the mother or the baby. They are healthy, and the child was born healthy and drug-free and so forth. And there wasn't any. So that was an attempt to make a report from Sasha's birth.
So all this time, since the first child has been taken, you've been in court battling with them
Every month. In
to get your
2000,
children.
yes, in 2004, I had 2 jobs I was working, and I lost one because I was in court so many appearances with no progress. All these children were placed under supervised visitation. Little did I know that the foster parents to Emmanuel and Kevin wanted to adopt children, and at that time had no children. Little did I know that. Nobody explained that to me. Nobody worked with me to give me a plan of what to do for reunification.
Right.
I was left to my own self to figure out, with multiple lawyers, different lawyers being changed back and forth, what can I do? When I had stable housing, when I had an income, I went to numerous mental health evaluations to comply.
Now, I remember you telling me that the caseworkers would call your landlords at your respective residences and harass them to the point where the landlord wouldn't want you staying there.
Yeah, that started.
So that you wouldn't have
an apartment of my own. Yes, that started in 2004, Joe, when Sasha was born.
Right.
She was not taken at birth, as I just stated.
Right.
However, I had another apartment, and at some point when she was approximately, I think it was 6 weeks old, they discovered her birth, and then they filed to remove her. At that same time, the caseworker was calling my then landlord and making statements to the landlord, and he was not wanting to speak to her. And I know she called at least 4 times, and he was telling me, you know, that she was calling and somewhat making some discreditable things about me, which he was not comfortable with, and considering of not renewing my tenancy.
Oh my God.
So that was harassment, and I didn't know where to turn to. Where do I turn to report all these things? So Sasha was removed, and the threat was if we didn't bring her to court, they would arrest us. And that was made by Judge Rivoli again, and that was in 2004. And all the children were born healthy, full-term babies, drug-free.
With a good mother, and they were all taken from you.
And so in 2004, Sasha was removed into a different foster home, and I was still under supervised visitations, never to be moved to my home for visits or anywhere, always with a caseworker, somebody present watching.
Who's the active workers on the case now?
From
CPS.
Yes, from 2004, from 2002 to 2004, it was Judith Bentley. Then she transferred the case to, in 2004, it was transferred to, at the end of 2004, Tamara Singletary. Briefly, she had the case for about a year.
And who has it now?
Well, now, in the last stage with my last child, it's Maureen Piccone. So
I think that's the lady that you showed me when I went to court with you to do the court advocacy.
Yes, so I'm coming up to...
I got some bad vibes from her. I'm a pretty good judge of people. And one of the things I did notice clearly that she was enjoying what was happening to you. Extremely. That she got extreme enjoyment. I didn't get any sense out of her whatsoever that she was concerned about a child at all. And that's one of the things that came through clear when she walked up to the table where me and you were sitting at.
Right.
Almost, if she would have stayed about 5 more seconds, I would have said, "Excuse me, we're talking." Because the vibes I got from her were that bad.
Yes.
So.
Yes. So the other part that was basically violates there's a handbook of the child welfare system.
Right.
And it states that there's always supposed to be efforts to place the children with biological parents.
That's the purpose.
Or family members.
Right.
And with neither with Kevin nor Emmanuel or Sasha was that ever really explored.
Right.
And not only that, but the children were kidnapped in such a manner where had I even wanted to have them adopted, which I never even thought of it or wanted that, I couldn't have even done that because
Right.
I couldn't have even gone to an adoption agency because there was an intervention from this body of individuals in New York State. So if had I wanted to have an open adoption with a couple that I picked, even that was I was treated like I had no rights as a citizen.
Right.
I've been treated like I have no rights,
And that's the worst thing about what they did to you. Because the whole purpose of Child Protective Services is to come into the home, if they can, fix any remedies. They're supposed to take efforts and steps towards improving the home for the sole purpose of uniting the child back with the family. If you read their manual that's online, their procedural manual, it says just this. The fact that they never made any attempts whatsoever to do this with you is the most troubling thing.
No. And I was often told things by caseworkers like, oh, we think you're very intelligent. But I could never figure out why every year would go by and then there would be something new filed against me of an alleged neglect. And Emmanuel, Kevin were taken at 3 days old, and there was no time for them to for us to leave, for me to take care of them.
Right.
Sasha was taken, and they were calling it something called derivative neglect, which I didn't even fully understand what that meant.
Derivative
Some
neglect.
kind of a term of claim of, because of the past, now the parent is neglecting another new child. But what happened in the past to neglect Kevin never was anything that was proven from 2001.
Right.
So then I knew that this was turning into something bigger than even the courts here could explain.
Right.
It was more like my constitutional rights was somehow involved, in all of this, the amendments, that I was not being protected by.
Right.
I had
14th Amendment, first of all.
Yeah, the 14th
I mean, you're supposed
Amendment.
to get equal protection under the law.
Right.
And it doesn't look like you didn't get that at all.
So I was continuously going to court into 2004, 2005. I had Misha in 2005. She was kidnapped from Strong Hospital the day of our discharge, and I was assaulted when that happened by a guard. The worker came, her last name is Bianchi, and she tried to get me to sign a paper that I didn't want to sign.
Right.
And nobody in the hospital told me that somebody was coming, or that there was a concern, or that something was wrong. I had another child which was with natural childbirth, no drugs even, no pain medication. I couldn't think of anybody who I knew who had tried harder to have a healthy child. I couldn't think of one person, that I knew.
Right.
And I knew that I had not done anything, again, to endanger my baby's development or birth or well-being. And I was assaulted by a guard who forcibly bruised my arms and back to stop me from trying to talk to the woman who was kidnapping my child.
Right.
So Misha was also put in a foster home, which was a totally different foster home. So at that time in 2005, at the end of 2005, I had lost my rights to Kevin. He was illegally adopted, and by the consent of the court here, Judge Rivoli. Then I had Emmanuel in the foster home. Then I had Sasha in another foster home, and Misha in a third foster home. The children weren't even all together, which was shocking to me because I was always told that they would always keep the kids together, and that came from the caseworkers. At that point, they went to terminating my rights to Sasha and Emmanuel. I went through almost 2 years of trials for those cases, and by that time, I was pending losing my rights to them. Misha was temporarily placed with her biological father from foster care. By then, the case was transferred to a different judge, and that was in 2006. And then I gave birth to Tasha in 2007. She was kidnapped from Rochester General Hospital the day we were leaving, and the person's last name was Lobu.
Okay.
Ms. Lobu, who came, and I was carrying her, and the day we were leaving, people were calling my hospital room saying, "Oh, we heard you had the baby," and hanging up on me again. And it was a flashback of what had happened in 2001.
Oh my God.
And I didn't know who it was, and they were calling, hanging up to my, and I said, I said to the hospital, I want some kind of a block put on my room, you know, for any calls, release for guards, for privacy and protection.
Right.
And I couldn't understand why the calls were still coming. I know today, through now going to school for healthcare, which I am presently involved in, that there are supposed to be protections for people with respect to potential domestic violence,
right,
or even child abduction, that the hospital is supposed to provide. And I didn't have that protection in 2007. So the woman came and she tried to get me to sign this paper again. And I said, no, you know, I'm getting ready to take my daughter home. And she said, no, I'm not going to let you. I'm going to, you know, use my title to stop you from leaving with her. And she never even showed me an ID card of who she was.
Right.
I just had to take her word. I started to hold my baby, afraid, you know, that something would happen to her, and that I didn't know where she was being taken to.
Right.
And I was breastfeeding her, and that was all stopped. So she was taken out of Rochester General in 2007, and that was when she was 3 days old. And then I later on found out that the allegation of that was that I was supposedly bipolar, even after, by then I had had 3 psychiatric evaluations by now Dr. Slimmer at St. Mary's Hospital, who had testified in court right before Tasha was born that I'm not bipolar and not schizophrenic. And when I tried to show the woman who took Tasha the papers, she wouldn't even look at them.
Right.
So anything I showed as proof was just ignored, and she was taken. I never threatened to hurt myself during the hospital. I felt like I didn't know how this could be happening again, why I was being targeted.
Now here you are.
And that takes us to 2007.
8 years later.
Yeah.
How are you doing now after going through all this? What?
Well, I don't have the closure on any of it. I don't have the peace that I need. Kevin was adopted out. Emmanuel and Sasha are pending an adoption, which I've filed papers to Washington, D.C. to try to stop that happening.
Right.
Tasha and Misha were awarded joint custody to me and her father, so they are not in foster care any longer.
Okay.
And then Sophia was born last year, exactly 1 year ago on the 25th of this month, May. And she was kidnapped from Strong Hospital at 3 days old by the same woman who came for Tasha. And I remembered her. And I said, I remember you, and you told me many things that didn't come true.
Right.
And she threatened me with guards and police. And I said, no, I'll call the police because I am being stalked by you. You are stalking me.
Right, exactly.
And I did call the police, and there was different things being transmitted back and forth from police department and me.
Right.
And I went to court for Sophia for a year. It's been a year now. And all I know is that the initial claim was this bipolar, which had already been ruled out by these 3 psychiatrists.
Was another playing chip again.
Once again. And so now this case has been in court for a year, and I was given supervised visits.
In front of what judge is it in front of?
Judge Ruhlman. And over the past year, the worker was changed to Maureen Piccone. A year ago, she started calling my 2 landlords without me signing permission or release forms for her to call, and the community, and they reported back to me that they were getting her calls and they were not comfortable with giving information out about me, so they were telling her, well, we don't really know who she is. We don't know who she is.
Right.
And then I later on found out that the worker, Piccone, had went behind my back and got a copy of some kind of papers they were claiming was my lease to try to prove there were other people living with me and so forth and so on. And I made very clear that I was just wanting my baby back.
Right, exactly.
There presently had been 5 court-ordered visits a week, which right now are actually being violated. There's actually right now a violation of the court orders going on right now.
Okay.
There's no 5 visits that's been set up in over 2 months with Sophia.
Since they've been ordered, they haven't even happened yet.
Well, no, they started initially, and then for the last 2 months, there hasn't been any set up. Right, and it's going on as we speak. I had 1 visit to my apartment 2 months ago, and now there's no follow-up with respect to that at all. My medical record was subpoenaed without my permission by the court, and Ms. Piccone and her supervisor, my medical record of the discharge of my birth of my baby, Tasha, in 2007, which I've asked to be returned to me because I didn't authorize it be released. And I find out that numerous people in the community were called by the caseworker and her supervisor without my signing any permission at all. And one friend was told different things about me that are not recorded anywhere. So it was a pattern of stalking. This has turned into a pattern of stalking. I can't have my life hostage to this anymore. I can't. After 8 years of going to court every month, and then I'm mistreated and degraded, and my children are not happy, and I just want them to be able to have a happy life.
Real quick, because we're running out of time, I want to give you the opportunity to express what you feel about what they done to you. What is your opinion of these individuals, the justice system? What do you fear was just and fair to you?
Well,
and say what you feel.
Well, after 8 years, I know that I was victimized by Monroe County Child Protective Services, and my children and I have been exploited. Lies have been told, money has been exchanged, it has become a business for foster care, and I am devastated, and I want my children back, and I am a loving, nurturing mother, and there is no closure, there's no amount of money that can compensate me for this traumatic, repeated victimization of my family, where we must move on with our life. I have no contact with 3 children right now because of the foster parents alienating us. And I constantly think and am concerned of my children's welfare and have no explanation of why I can't be informed about this.
I know this. When I heard your story and then reading this document, I gotta admit, it made me physically sick. Mm-hmm. Never have I heard such a story involving this level of extreme connivery in my life.
I am hurt. I am deeply hurt that after living in the United States, you know, for more than 30 years and paying taxes and working in the community and being involved with community and trying to help others, that this was done to us, to our family.
Okay. I'd like to thank you for coming on our show. Your story was a very disturbing one, but I mean, you're a very strong woman to hang in there for the 8 years like you did and fight what I would consider monsters for doing what they did to you. I mean, we've got 228 cities in this country. Our court cases in these cities turn out at least 5,000 cases per year. The domestic systems that we have in this country have been in place for almost 40 years. You take 5,000 cases, multiply that times 228, and multiply that times 40. Do the math. You're talking about millions of American citizens who have been tampered with in some shape, form, or fashion by that domestic judicial system. Child Protective Services, the family court system, all of it needs to be reshaped. It needs to be a place that administers fairness and justice for the American citizens that enter it.
Yes.
My name is Joe Lewis. You've been watching Justice Now, coming to you from Public Access Television, the People's Network. Thanks for tuning in. Goodbye, and may God bless you.